We're looking at Xinjiang, especially recent media coverage on alleged forced birth control against ethnic minorities. An AP report published on June the 29th claims the Chinese government is taking measures to cut birth rates among Uyghurs and other minorities as part of a campaign to curb its Muslim population. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has called the accusations groundless. Before we get to our media critique, some context first. Now, family planning was first introduced in China in the 1970s. It has been the shared responsibility of citizens and the whole society to help lift quality of life more rapidly by limiting the number of newborns. In order to preserve ethnic diversity, however, ethnic minorities, including the Uyghur people, had always enjoyed preferential population policies. In the 4 decades between 1978 and 2018, for example, the Uyghur population in Xinjiang doubled from 5.6 million to 11.7 million. Besides Uyghurs, the population of each of the top 5 ethnic minorities in Xinjiang has more or less doubled too. In southern Xinjiang, it is common to see Uyghur families with 4 or even more children. In July 2017, Xinjiang adopted new measures in line with those for the rest of the country as China rolled out what's known as the second child policy. Now, Han families are allowed to have the same number of children as their Uyghur counterparts, 2 in the city, 3 in the countryside. Yet, increased educational levels and socio-economic development, just like everywhere else in the world, have also resulted in lower birth rates across the board in Xinjiang. There has been significant progress in the protection of women's rights in Xinjiang in general. In 2003, the mortality rate for mothers were 163 per 100,000. By 2018, that rate had fallen to 27 per 100,000. The gender ratio in high school is basically even, boys and girls. In 1915, Xinjiang had 3,000 ethnic minority cadres. By 2018, that number rose 143 times to 430,000. Half of them are women. But when you read recent reports on Xinjiang, many of these details have been left out. Instead, the articles opt for a narrative of imagination and speculation at best. Now, let me explain what I mean. On June the 29th, a so-called investigative report or article published by the AP put out some sensational accusations against the Chinese government regarding forced birth control in Xinjiang, allegedly targeting the Uyghur population. These are serious accusations on the order of genocide, as this report quotes a scholar at Newcastle University in the UK. These are direct means of genetically reducing the Uyghur population. But underneath the facade of seemingly persuasive sensationalism, there lies the usual gimmicks of bad journalism on top of a political agenda meant to spread misinformation and disinformation about the Chinese political system and leadership. The article claims to be based on government statistics and documents and interviews with 30 witnesses, yet it soon becomes clear that the article is mostly based on a report authored by Adrian Zenz, a German researcher who popularized the idea that 1 million people were locked up in Xinjiang based on accounts of only 8 people. His latest report on birth rate in Xinjiang was funded by the Jamestown Foundation, a conservative think tank based in Washington, D.C. One only needs to take a quick read of his 20-odd page report in order to find, well, more questions than answers. For a research report to be credible, certain academic standards should be observed. Evidence must be solid, for instance, the arguments sound. But in his report, one just stumbles a tad too often. For instance, he claims that most recently Uyghur regions appear to conceal birth rate data, indicating its increasing sensitivity. Now, for the first time in about 2 decades, Kashgar Prefecture's 2019 annual report does not divulge birth, death, or natural population growth rates. The reason for this is, according to Zhengxin, apparent. Kashgar's population declined between 2018 and 2019. While this could be due to outmigration, it might also be caused by extremely low birth rates. Can you believe your ears? This is apparent. Such sentences should never have been the language of a researcher. Simply because such details are missing in one annual report, could any serious scholar reach the conclusion that this must have been the result of a forced birth control campaign? Zhengxin was right about the population of Kashgar Prefecture declining from 2018 to 2019 from 4.63 million to 4.62 million. The difference was around 10,000 people, less than 0.2%. And according to my sources, the number of Han people in Kashgar actually dropped more than Uyghur people. So on what basis could he extrapolate that there was extremely low birth rates among Uyghur women only? Zhengxin himself couldn't exclude outmigration as a factor either. So the reason is apparent, except that he is only speculating. But sheer speculation is the least bothersome issue in Zhengxin's report. Next comes sheer fabrication. Zhengxin uses budget reports of local health commissions in various prefectures as they are obliged to be released as a common practice. Zhengxin tried long and hard to find bits and pieces of information in these budget reports, coupled with audacious stretches of imagination. He writes, by 2019, Xinjiang planned for over 80% of women of childbearing age in the rural southern four minority prefectures to be subjected to birth control measures with long-term effectiveness. He provided a source link, which is the Xinjiang Health Commission's budget report issued on January 29, 2019. But this sentence or such information is nowhere to be found in this budget report. In short, it doesn't take a doctoral's mind to conclude that Zhengxin's so-called research is very problematic, unable to withstand the scrutiny in the court of law. Back to the AP article, aside from the shoddiness it borrows from the Zhengxin report, the journalists also violated basic professional rules. When quoting witnesses' account, a journalist is supposed to verify it, at least try to do it as much as possible from a third-party perspective, or at least add something like AP couldn't independently verify the claim. Instead, the article used these accounts to construct a fiction-like story. The sound bites they highlight are all carefully chosen to maximize emotional impact on readers. Very clever gimmicks. The 30 or so interviewees are living outside China. It's obvious what they hold as grudges against the Chinese government. They basically spoke along the same line, just as the analysts quoted in the AP article condemning the alleged practices. But out of the 19-page-long article by AP, there was not one voice from Uyghur people in Xinjiang or anybody who questions the credibility of Zhengxin's research. So, all in all, there you have the complete loop. Now, biased news reports based on shoddy research upon which policies or sanctions are rolled out. Can any country in this world swallow such accusations? Joining me for the discussion are Professor Zhengxin from the China University of Political Science and Law, and Frank Sieren, German journalist and best-selling author based in Beijing. Gentlemen, welcome to this edition of Headline Buster. So, as I said, in a report released in early January 2021, Li Xiaoxia, a researcher at the Xinjiang Development Research Center, says that contrary to outside claims, the Uyghur population in Xinjiang has actually been growing continuously and steadily, faster overall than the other minority groups and the majority Han people. For instance, from, as you can see in this chart, from 2010 to 2018 alone, the population of all ethnic minorities, which is the column on the left, of all ethnic minorities increased from 13 million to about 16 million. That's an increase of about 22%. The Uyghur population, the column in the middle, increased from 10 million to nearly 13 million, and an increase of 25%, while the majority Han population grew from 8.8 million to 9 million, an increase of 2%. Professor Huo, let me go to you. How are such numbers backed up? How much is the credibility of the numbers of researcher Li?
Well, I should say that both Professor Li and the German author Adrian, they are focusing on the same thing, that is the population in Xinjiang. However, they draw the different conclusions. I'm not expert at the population. However, I'm a professor doing research every day. So I can make a general observation on the two reports. In my eyes, I think that the credibility of an academic work to a large degree depends on the educational background and the research experience of the author. Professor Li Xiaoxia is an expert on Xinjiang. She studies in Xinjiang for many years, and she has doing research on the population in Xinjiang since the 1990s. However, Adrian Zheng is a German who used to be an expert at the theology, and he suddenly turns out to be a so-called leading expert on Xinjiang only in recent years. And during such a short period, he has published more than 10 articles or 10 reports relating to Xinjiang in such a short period. And all of these reports has been carried out outside China. So I think that a man with a common sense could say that Professor Li Xiaoxia is a more reliable, or be a more proper professional to do research and evaluate on the population in Xinjiang.
Mm-hmm. Frank, what is your reaction? What is your judgment of the credibility of the different reports we mentioned?
I actually can't really give a judgment, and I'm kind of getting dizzy with all these figures because it's very difficult for me. I'm not a Xinjiang specialist. It's very difficult for me to prove it because for me it's not possible to go there. It's very difficult to speak to different civil society groups. So I actually can't say anything, and compared to Western countries, the only thing I see, it's not very transparent. In Western countries, I could go to, people are in camps, I could go talk to their lawyers, I could talk to the judges, I could see the verdicts, I could talk to civil society groups. That's all not possible in the case of Xinjiang. So therefore, I'm very helpless to get a really decent opinion on what's it's going on there.
Professor Huo, what do you think of the reasons or the explanation that Frank has just given? The fact that because you don't have the access as people want into the region of Xinjiang, and he's not, of course, the only one who talk about this kind of lack of access, so you can't really verify. So how can you tell the world that what you have come up with is credible?
Well, as I said, that in order to get an accurate evaluation on the population in Xinjiang, a researcher has to do a lot of field survey inside Xinjiang, in rural areas and in the cities. And I think that being a professor in Xinjiang, who works in Xinjiang, Professor Li has carried out a lot of field survey inside Xinjiang. However, Adrian Zheng is a German who has not been inside Xinjiang since 2017. So in my eyes, I think that only by doing research, especially the field survey, can provide an accurate picture of the situation in Xinjiang.
One thing about this German researcher, Adrian Zheng, is that he is, part of this organization called Victim of Communism. He's funded by American money, and it is very difficult to expect that if he's ever given the opportunity to come to China and investigate, he will have the kind of unbiased, neutral perspective to do an objective investigation, Frank.
Yes, but it's not 100% sure only because it's American money that it's not independent. That's too easy. It could be, but it could be very independent as well. There are a lot of research done with American money, for example, on Chinese in Africa, at Johns Hopkins University, and it looks very independent to me. So that's a bit too easy. Again, there is a lack of transparency, and if there wouldn't be a lack of transparency, we wouldn't have this discussion. And then it would have been easy to evaluate both positions. But now I'm not able to do it. That's as simple as it is.
Frank, honestly, to be frank, yeah, you have been living in China for so many years, for so long. Is that honestly how you see that, you know, because of the so-called lack of transparency, according to whatever standard, that China is not telling truth, China is not able to do the right thing? Because yes, because you seems to because what you're saying, yeah, but because what you're saying, because of the lack of transparency, so there is a question mark on everything, and that seems to be a blanket statement, right? Because it's not everything that you don't have access. You actually live in China, you actually can see, you can talk to people, you can have friends in Xinjiang. Asian sense might not be able to travel. Adrian Sands might not have been able to come to Xinjiang, but there are many foreigners who have been to Xinjiang, right? Who can talk to people in Xinjiang, make friends with people in Xinjiang. I know a lot of foreigners who have been to Xinjiang. So how can you say there is a blanket lack of access or transparency?
I didn't say there's a complete blanket lack of access.
But you keep mentioning this term.
I only said that I cannot verify the facts you told me. I can't do it right now. It's not possible.
Professor Huo?
You know, when the Western media criticize China, it always accuse the lack of transparency. But the problem is that if they have the access to travel into China, I think sometimes they do not conduct a objective research, and sometimes they have a conclusion, and then they go to China to find their so-called conclusion, you know, in order to support their conclusions by finding some information or some one-sided news. So I think that's the problem, or that's the difficulties for China to telling the world the truth.
Professor Huo, help us understand why this topic is so sensitive.
Well, first of all, Xinjiang is an autonomous region in China, and for many years it suffers from, you know, violence, especially the terrorist attacks. So for this reason, Xinjiang is a more or less sensitive issue in China. And another issue is that because some Western, you know, forces or Western media always accuse China of the violation of human rights in the minority, in the ethnic minorities. And so on the one hand, China want to, you know, open this region to the world. But on the other hand, the consequence is that it seems that many Western media just turn a blind eye to what they find in Xinjiang. They just purposefully select the information to support their, you know, the conclusion that they have already had in their hearts. So this makes the situation becomes, you know, more and more sensitive. So, you know, on the one hand, China is, whenever it tries to, you know, telling the truth to the world, I think that the government is also a little bit worried whether these Western medians could have an objective point of view. So I think that this makes the matter more or less, you know, complex.
Yeah, I think it's a mutual trust thing. When the authorities lose trust in certain media, certain organizations, then of course they're not going to give you access. I know some foreign journalists in China have actually pretty good access. For instance, they have been allowed to visit some you know, institutions that are off limit to many other of their counterparts. Why? Because they believe they're able to go in there and have an objective look without imposing their opinions on the audience, and then they get access. Frank, I think that is the situation here. It's fluid.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we have, but we have in Western countries, we have a completely different
yeah, it's
concept of
different. You know,
journalism.
you have to understand it's different,
different,
and the situation
you can't tell a journalist. The journalist actually has the right to be biased, or has the right to judge the facts himself. That's a risk, and some would say even a disadvantage of Western media. But on the other side, there's transparency, and I don't really think it's a good strategy to say, because the journalists are not reporting in a way I want them to report, I'm stopping being transparent. I think I do agree it's a problem, but the solution which is chosen right now, it's probably not the right way, because it's creating even more distrust, and it's creating even more rumors and misunderstandings. So I rather stick to the Western concept of transparency and taking the risk that the journalist is reporting in a way I do not agree with.
Professor Huo, what do you think is China's understanding of the role of the media? Frank says sometimes, you know, in a Western circumstance, journalists are allowed to be biased. And what is China's understanding towards this approach? And why does China believe that it has to be different? And, you know, looking at what China has been able to achieve over the past 40 years, lifting its, you know, the socioeconomic development levels of its people, the way it has been operating.
Frankly speaking, I believe that both Chinese government and Chinese people find that it is very difficult for the outside world to understand China, even though the world is a globalized world today. On the one hand, you may find that during the past 40 years, China has made significant progress in almost in every aspect. And for instance, for the situation in Xinjiang, the population or the birth rate in recent years decreased in Xinjiang. Well, in the eyes of Chinese researcher, this is because of the improvement of society and economy, and because of the improvement of educational level and females' society social status. However, to some Western journalists, it is because of the so-called forced sterilization. So Chinese people and the Chinese government feel quite confused why the Western world see China through a colored spectacles. So I think that this is a difficulties that China faces the world, and also a problem that the Western world watches China. I think that this problem should be solved by some way or another in the future. Otherwise, on the one hand, China feels that the Western world does not know China, and on the other hand, it seems that Western world does not believe what the Chinese government are saying. I think it's the problem for the understanding between China and the world today.
Law and Frank Sieren, German journalist and author and best-selling author based here in Beijing. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. As always, you can go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.